Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the fourth roundtable of the webinar series Inside Club Football, organized by Johan Cruyff Institute in partnership with Portas Consulting. We will dedicate today's session to talk about performance analytics with Adrien Tarascon, Head of Player Development at Lille Olympique Sporting Club, and Brendan MacFarlane, Head of Recruitment at Toulouse FC. Neil Rajani, Expert Manager on Digital and Data at Portas Consulting, will moderate the session. I would like to remind all the attendees that you can also participate in the conversation, typing your questions to our speakers in the questions tab you can see on the bottom right of your screen. And in case you cannot follow the whole session, you will receive the recording afterwards. So hello, guys. Good afternoon. And thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure.
Neil, I give you the floor and see you all at the end of the session, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gemma. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the fourth webinar of our series Inside Club Football, where we take you behind the scenes of leading football clubs to explore the strategic decision-making that really fuels success on and off the pitch. Today, together with our panelists, we will be talking about one of the hottest topics in football, harnessing performance analytics. I'm Neil Rajani from Portas Consulting, a global strategy consultancy dedicated to the world of sport. And I'm very happy to be joined by two experts who have experience using performance data to support player development and recruitment at some of the most popular clubs in Europe. First, going to Brendan and then Adrien. Please could you share a few words about your current role and also the previous clubs that you've worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Brendan MacFarlane. I started out at Brentford Football Club. I was their lead France scout, and I moved to Toulouse about a year ago. So I'm now the head of recruitment in charge of a team of 4 different scouts. And yeah, that's basically it.
Hi, everyone. So Adrien Tarascon, I work as head of player development in LOSC Lille. So my day-to-day work is basically to develop the pro players and the young players in our academy to ensure they have the biggest value. Before that, I was for 1 year in AS Monaco with a role both on player development, recruitment, and game analysis. And even before that, I did 7 years at SaintGermain between player development and game analysis.
Thank you both for those introductions. So today we will be covering several topics on the use of performance data in football, including the adoption of performance insights across players, managers, and directors of football, how clubs are going beyond basic statistics to examine player tracking information, the growth of proprietary models for clubs to really gain that competitive edge, and then finally, what the future holds as well. But before we dive into each of these topics, it'd be good to understand from each of our panelists what it's like to really be involved in one of the most envied roles in football. So Adrien, starting with you, what are really the day-to-day activities for the head of player analysis? What type of data are you using and tools do you use throughout your role?
So every week is really aligned on games. So there's going to be the post-game period, the pre-game period. But let's take a day like today, middle of the week. We're -2 from the next game against AS Monaco. So it starts with the morning with gathering with the staff, with especially the performance staff that have all the physical data. The first thing I need to know is which players can do some additional individual work. What is the load for the collective part of the session? So we can plan on, according to our game model and to the playing style of AS Monaco, the few bits that we can pass individually to some players, because -2, we're already using some 5 minutes, 10-minute drills to prepare for the next game. And so it started with these meetings with a few individual videos with players, in this case, pre-game for AS Monaco. And then we prepared a session with the assistants. So they had some individual tasks. Some meetings also after the training session, more on some mental preparation, monitoring for some players. And in this case, the afternoon on Wednesdays, I do video sessions, analysis sessions with some of the best prospects of the academy. We have, I would say, a talent pool of the 10 hottest prospects of the academy in Lille that I supervise myself. So each Wednesday, we do video sessions with them. That's, for instance, the day of today.
And just touching a bit more on that game model that you mentioned, what sort of data are you using to input into that model, and how has that game model developed over time?
So the purpose of the data on the game model is to make the game model measurable. And the strategy we have is to start with aligning the game model that was wanted between the president and the coach, and trying to replicate it for the pro team in the academy. And in this, my role is, of course, to promote it to the players, ensure it's followed, and to track its development, and also to try to determine which KPIs are going to be able to, I would say, quantify the game model. So in terms of even data, we have a coaching staff that is really focusing on the intensity, for instance, pressured actions, high aggressive actions, because we use a StatsBomb event data. And in terms of tracking, we're doing tests with several companies to get tracking data for both our pro team. We have, of course, the data of the league, but we're trying to do similar data sets, similar KPIs for the pro and the youth. And we're very much into the pace to goal, the verticality, trying to make sure that our attacks are as fast as possible.
Brilliant. Thanks. Thank you for sharing. Brendan, coming to you, how does this vary with your role, obviously as recruitment manager at Toulouse, and what type of data and tools are you using?
Well, we are very lucky. Our club is owned by Redbird Capital. Redbird have significantly invested in data in all sectors, not just in sports or in football. The people at Redbird, they've invested in Zealous, a data and stats analytics company based in Texas. Basically, we are fed high quality information directly from Zealous in terms of our recruitment. So basically, we've got access to a world-leading database of names and players across the world. I work on a daily basis at the club, Julien Demeaux, who does outstanding work. Julien has implemented data at all levels of the club. So it sort of mirrors what Adrien was talking about in the non-recruitment side of things. But data is implicated in every level of our club, from the academy up to the first team. In terms of my role, where data is crucial, basically we couldn't do what we do without data now. It's a intrinsic part of what we do. Basically every day new players will get put through to us that come through the data, and then it's up to myself and my team of scouts to basically do the technical observation of each player and to sort of stress test the data to some extent. The way we work, it's not like a lot of other clubs that use data to validate what the scouts do. The scouts that are at Toulouse are here to give a human eye interpretation of what the data provides us with. So it's different in that regard. It's been, for me, a really eye-opening 12 to 14 months at the club. I think the way that we do things is very innovative. But overall, the most important thing is that it's successful.
Brilliant. And how different is that for your from previous roles that you've had at Brentford?
Yeah, I think obviously there's more of a difference in the sense that the role that I do now is more hands-on. When I was at Brentford, I was the lead France scout, so I worked in the French market for the club, but I didn't look at what Brentford were really doing in other markets. And I was sort of a bit removed from the decision-making process in that regard. So I would recommend players, but I wouldn't really know what Brentford were doing in terms of who they were looking at in other markets. So there wasn't really a point of comparison. Today, I've got like a global overview of every target that we're looking at. I can look at their data. It's not my job to interpret the data, but I need to have an idea of how these players look in the data. So every day when we're looking at players, I speak to the head of data, and then we make exchanges based upon what the scouts are saying and what the data is saying.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. So now we're going to move on to our first topic, which is really adoption of performance data and insights across the club. So Adrien, starting with you, how do you work with players and coaches today? Do you have examples of processes you've put in place to ensure usage of data?
Yes, of course. So if we focus on the individual development part, I've worked and presented actually several years ago on the concept that I call data tuning. Basically, the concept was issued on the idea that more and more teams and clubs were data scouting. It's not the case of Toulouse, but on the same sets of data, and not only even data. So if they use the same kind of data, how can you make sure at least you manipulate the data, or in the same line that you improve your player on the pitch, you make sure the improvement is very visible on data. And this was very crucial for some players, notably in AS Monaco. If you look at an international player like Adrien Tarascon, who had a big increase in both his performance on the pitch and his data. And with this kind of very cognitive, very intelligent player, it was very easy to work because we were fixing ourselves targets in terms of deep progressions per game, in terms of progressive passes per game. But the key basically was to have the player understand his identity as a football player. What does it need to contribute to his team? And then how does it translate into data? How do I give these progressive passes? And also, when are the moments to be vertical and to get these progressive passes that are going to be very important for data-wise? And in the case, for example, of Aurélien, I think he's the best player to play a vertical pass just after recovery. So it's a total connection between the data part and the football part.
And is it different analyses done for different positions? So you talked about the midfield there, but yeah. Can you talk through, I guess, maybe some of the forwards or the defensive positions and how that varies?
Each position, of course, is going to have its specifics, but it's not going to be only each position. In terms of data tuning, yes, but when you talk about individual development, especially in the modern world, you're as individualized as there is as many individual development methods as there are players. So we're going to, for some attackers, we're going to look at their creation in terms of shots, the number of shots they take inside the box, making sure they don't take too many poor quality shots outside of the box. So the expected goals per shots, we're going to monitor this. For other players, if we have the perception that their future and the identity is not that much into the goal scoring, but into creating more for others, we're going to look at how many crossing positions do they create for their partners, how, when they touch the ball in the opposite half, do they make the OBV of their team evolve, etc., etc. So it's very adapted to each player, and the key is understanding the identity of the player and then relating the proper data to. It's, I would say, much more flexible than the recruitment part, where we use data also, and we have our fixed standards because the data is going to be related to the positional competences that we scout. And on these positional competences, we have the eyeball, and we try to have the data that matches these positional competences to evaluate them.
And with managers, how do you work with managers to ensure that they're using a lot of the right insights and data on a week-by-week basis?
So the main moment is going to be, again, pre-game and post-game. In terms of pre-game, you can either influence the strategy. What I call the strategy is really the general setup of your team and the data. So, for instance, we had a game first part of the season where we were playing Lyon, who had a very poor physical data and very poor technical data starting from 60 minutes of a game. So we had a clear plan in this game. We were just playing after a Champions League qualification to basically freeze the game until minute 60 and try to get Lyon exhausted. And we didn't win. We did 0-0, but we did 1.50 to 0.05 in expected goals in the last half an hour. So this is a concrete example where data can influence strategy. This is one point. Then it can be on the percentage of duels. For instance, in some games, if we know we have a player that's very strong on duels, another is going to be very weak, we can target this. We put at the disposal of the staff all the information in terms of which players are going to be the more vulnerable against the press. And all these information can be used one week or another or not be used.
Very, very interesting. I didn't realize that those stats at the specific team level. Great. Moving then onto Brendan. How do you work with football directors? What type of processes are you putting in place to ensure you're getting across all the insights and data that's relevant for them?
I think something that's of integral importance to us is that whenever I have a recruitment meeting with the president here at the club, the head of data is in the meeting as well. So I know in some clubs you might have a head of recruitment coming to the meeting, reporting back what the head of data said. I don't like that approach. I think I can speak for what we do in terms of the scouting and the technical analysis, but at the same time, I think the head of data needs to be there to give over his interpretation. Because as I said earlier, like my job isn't to sit there and interpret data. My job's to find players, to contact agents, to contact clubs. So we need to make the most of our expertise. Luckily here at Toulouse, we've got a president, Damien Comoli, that's been at the forefront of bringing data into football. So he's got a very good understanding of data. It's not like we have to convince him of the strengths. He's someone that's been, at the forefront and a pioneer in the implementation of data. So here at Toulouse, it's not really difficult. Everybody knows how used data is throughout the club, how much it's utilised. So that's not a complexity. What I would say sometimes can be a complexity is when we speak to agents and we say to them, for example, your player doesn't score very well in our data model. They might say, well, in this data model, the player scores very well. And obviously that doesn't work. It's like putting a square in a circle. We've got our own needs. They're needs that experts have established. They're needs that are here to fulfill what we want to achieve. And I think it needs to be respected. There's a lot of thought goes into this. And for example, I had a conversation recently with an agent who was very open and very understanding, but we're speaking about data. And I said, there's Harvard professors that have worked on this. It's not just like being developed out of nowhere, it's to be respected.
Yeah, brilliant. And actually, we've got a question from the audience from Jack Fitzsimmons. So his question is, how thorough will you assess players' stats before you decide to go and look further at the potential signings? So almost two phases of analyses.
I think there's two elements. First of all, for us, our starting point usually is data. Players will come through the data before we've even looked at them or before we even know who they are. It can work two ways. Obviously, I can bring players to the head of data who then checks out the players. Or that's why speaking to agents is so important. I meet agents all the time. I've had 2 or 3 agents here today. We just have a coffee, have a chat. But whenever players are proposed, I put them to the head of data and he does the analysis to see how they look. Maybe it's players that we've not come across. In terms of Jack's question, I think the first stage would be we would check how the player scores in the data. If the player has a score over a certain value in our data system, then they merit and warrant further investigation. I think the next stage is obviously to get the player watched. And I think, last year we must have watched, I don't have the figures in front of me at the moment, but I remember off the top of my head, it was about over 1,000 different matches that we watched throughout the course of a season. So the data is hugely important, but we don't rely just on the data alone. We have to actually watch matches. In terms of actually travelling to matches, we do that, but usually it's in the last stage. So first of all, has the player got a good score on the data system? Do we think the player's attributes when we watch the player match up to the data? And then obviously we need to find out the financial information. Like there's no point me traveling to Tokyo to watch a player that we can't afford. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of the player's time. It's pointless and it's a waste of resources. So we will go and watch a player live if we're already really keen on the player. But 99% of the work that we do now, I would say, is on video or it's local scouting within France, because it's less time consuming. But yeah, so I think obviously we need to do a thorough tactical and technical evaluation of the player. But to respond to Jack's question, data is usually the starting point in the process.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing. Now, moving really on to sport investment. Now, over the last few years, we've seen a real influx of private equity into football with the likes of City Football Group, Redbird, and others. The clubs represented here are also backed by considerable investment. So, Brendan, starting with you, how do you see the role of really recruitment and the use of performance data changing in that new environment?
I think at the moment, in terms of propriety, if you look at Brentford, for example, where I was before, who obviously also their owner owns Midtjylland, and you look at Toulouse, both clubs were owned by groups or people who have a philosophy and have a connection to data. So there's no other way of working within these clubs. You know, it's not for debate. That's how things are done. That's how things will always be done. So in terms of people buying clubs, I think if someone comes to a club who is already convinced by the efficacy of data, they will implement that throughout the club at all levels. I think sometimes, you know, there's certain clubs where there's maybe a halfway house approach where people are toying with the idea of it, but not really implementing it at all levels. And I think that can be problematic. I think it can be all or nothing. So I think going forward, I think in terms of people buying clubs, data might become even more important in terms of spotting the players that can be high value assets. Trading is obviously something that's important within football. I think it's like what our president said recently. You know, there's no club in football nowadays that isn't a selling club. And to be honest with you, I think that's going to become more and more important. There might be certain clubs that buy players purely from an investment point of view. Buy the player, develop the player, sell the player on. And data can be a massive tool within that. But also in terms of the success, and thankfully this season we've managed to get into Ligue 1. Data has had a direct impact on us achieving that success. So I think it can be multifaceted, either in terms of data being used to help clubs generate income or value, or data being used to help clubs achieve objectives.
Brilliant. Bringing Adrien in here, I guess, how do you see your role changing in with the changing economic climate and the influx of private equity?
Well, I actually changed a bit my role myself. 3 years ago in my last season, 3-4 years ago in my two last seasons in Paris, I started doing individual development. Why did I start doing individual development? Because I was working on scouting, data scouting, until I realized, okay, for Paris Saint-Germain is one market, but for most teams, we were having more or less similar data. We were arriving to a moment where there were less and less players that were anonymous or easy bets, low-hanging fruits. So you basically had a lot of competition on the market. For instance, this summer we had to fight with 10 other teams with sometimes much higher offers in terms of wages for a player called Amadou Onana that we purchased in Lille. And how do you make the difference in this case? It has to be through the sporting project, and in this case through the individual development project. So I think in Lille or in Monaco, because I was offered a contract in Monaco for this, they were convinced that with the evolution, with the need of trading, selling players, scouting is one thing, but scouting is often now an area where the goal is to not lose money, not even to win money like I would say 4 or 5 years ago. And in the individual development part, you really want to create the value for the ownership.
And touching on that fact, we're seeing really a real shift in almost hyperinflation in the football market of sales over the last few years.
Yeah.
How has that changed your analysis or even changed the type of modeling that you're doing?
It's I think it's very understand for a club like Lille to understand its position in the food chain in the market, and it's very important to make our president or ownership understand the mechanics of this, as you say, because for instance, we've done studies that prove that the teams that overperform most compared to their budget are teams playing with 5. It's not necessarily correlated, but an observation on the market is that the forward positions, maybe because scoring goals is the hardest thing to do, are the ones with the most inflated prices. And for instance, if you want to play with 5, generally you're going to do the economy of wingers. And for a club like Lille, a decent winger able to perform is going to cost 15 million. And if you try to buy wing backs in comparison to these wingers, it's going to be an average price of 6 million. So all this has to be taken into account. And if you're in a purely speculative approach, I think it's important for us to tell the owners that the positions where you can still win most money is midfielders, center backs, and absolutely not the forwards, for instance.
Brendan, bringing you in here on the inflation market, but also the different pricing of these different positions. How has that really impacted your role over the last few years?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think often people will ask me, are there certain positions that are harder to find than others? And the answer for me is no. I could give you a list of 100 different left backs that I really like, but there's inflation in that position. So finding the players isn't difficult. Finding players at the right price is difficult. And obviously that's it's not really a subtle difference. I think we operate a model in which we uniquely try to buy players that are under the age of 25. We sort of view experience in a different way. We see experience as minutes played, not the age of a player. So, for example, if a player is 29 and has 4,000 minutes, or a player is 21 and has 4,000 minutes, which would be phenomenal, we would go for the 21-year-old and say he's as experienced as the 29-year-old. So we try to be creative in terms of how we interpret things. We hope that can create different market opportunities. And I think hopefully that will allow us to overcome certain difficulties we see in terms of inflation. To give you an example, we signed Mikkel Dessler, who's a right back. He was a player who was, I think, 25, so he was sort of borderline too old for us. But he was playing for a team, Haugesund, who were, I think, 12th or 13th in the Elite Serien in Norway. And he was a player that we felt, he came through the data, but we looked at him and we thought, why is this guy not being picked up by any other teams? What I think had happened there is he was a player who, for want of a better phrase, had been put on the scrap heap a bit. People thought, okay, he's 25, 26, he's approaching his peak. Let's go for younger players. And there was a marked difference between his price and the price of 21-year-old, 22-year-old players we looked at. So in that instance, we opted for the older player, which isn't something that we normally do, but we did it because we thought we're getting a player who is undervalued by the market purely because of the club that he's at and because of his age. And he's probably been our best player this season. Not our best player, but he's been one of the top, I would say, top 5 players. Every week he's on the fans forums, he's always getting 7 out of 10 at least. So he's been good for us.
Wow, that's a really good success story there.
But just to interject there, Neil, on that point, I think he was a player that was coming up to the end of his contract. that's a market that is going to become increasingly important for clubs like Toulouse, I think. High data scoring players that are at the end of their contract are of massive interest to us.
Brilliant. Just another question actually from the audience, Rodrigo. Has the inflation of the market really forced clubs to look more outside of Europe, in places like Africa, South America, or North America?
If I can answer that one quickly first, Adrien, if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think France is very unique. There are market opportunities in France that didn't really exist for me in my previous role when I was at Brentford. Obviously, there's the GBE system in England, which has changed things a bit with Brexit. But France, luckily, due to the Cotonou Agreement, has a system in place in which players that come from countries that are signatory countries to the Cotonou Agreement can come and play here much more easily than they could in England or Scotland or other countries. So African players, because a lot of countries in Africa are Cotonou signatories, are very much interested to us. Obviously, there's the linguistic angle as well in North Africa and the rest of Africa. If we sign a player who's French speaking, obviously the adaptation is more easy. But in terms of the actual inflation of the market, yeah, I would say it has forced us to look at. Forced us is a strong word. We do look at different markets, but I wouldn't necessarily say it would be the ones that Rodrigo's pointed to there in his question. We've looked more at Scandinavia and Northern Europe, Eastern Europe as well. There's market opportunities there. For example, we signed a player, Rafael Ratal, a Brazilian player from Slovan Bratislava. I think if he'd been playing in Ligue 2 in France, we'd have maybe paid 4 times as much as what we paid for him coming from Slovakia. And obviously, he came through the data as well. He was a player that was playing in the best team in Slovakia and won the league there and won the cup. So if it wasn't for data, I don't know if we would have came across him.
Adrien, really same question to you. Are the clubs you've worked with in the past or working with now, have they looked at different markets because of that inflation? And obviously it will change.
And I think each year it's evolving. Brendan just mentioned Scandinavia. Scandinavia last summer and even 2 years ago, because Toulouse is very specialized in Scandinavia market, they do very well, is not Scandinavia yet this summer. So inflation goes very fast, and I think Scandinavia was even a paradise 3 years ago. Then it goes up and down. As we see today, some Asian countries like Korea and Japan with the limits of cultural adaptation, but I would say the most reasonable in terms of quality price, together with Africa. And of course, some Eastern Europe countries. 1.5 years ago, there were astonishing prices in South America. So it was really all you can grab. Leverkusen was very good in getting Pierre-Wing Capier, for instance, for $8 million, etc., etc. So it goes with the economy. Just to answer on the question, North America for me is overinflated. South America was stopped by COVID and the difficult situation there economically for the teams, and is starting to get again prices that are not that much reasonable, but it's totally integrated in our strategy and also at the youth level, I would say, because we have the chance of being Toulouse is not far, but we are 1 hour train from the biggest talent pool in Europe, which is Île-de-France, the region of Paris and its suburbs, and it attracts all the clubs throughout Europe, maybe less now the British clubs, but all the clubs are into this pool, and it's very hard for us to keep our best players. And even when you keep them, you're going to have to pay often wages that are not going to be as much competitive quality price as you can find in some other places like Africa.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing. So really moving on to the next topic, which is really the growth of proprietary models and proprietary use of data. Brendan, you spoke there about your high-scoring data model, and I want to dig deeper a little bit into that secret sauce, if you can. What could you share a bit more about the factors that go into that, and then how much of that is now moving towards proprietary use of data as opposed to using some of the more accessible data sources?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, first of all, data in itself is a tool. How you use data is a different question, and how you interpret it is another one as well. And I think what we do well here is we've got people who can almost translate data, the numbers, into something that anybody can understand, and we can have open conversations at the club about what it means. And I think that's good in a sense that it doesn't, within the culture of the club, there's no division in that regard. It's not like someone is keeping away information from the rest of the club. And I think that's important. In terms of the proprietary models and what we do uniquely, I think we have a bespoke reporting system within the club. Basically, what I try to do with my scouts is almost create our own data by creating a scoring system within the club. So basically, I wouldn't say it's in competition with the data, but what we try and find is we try and find correlations between high-scoring players on the data and high-scoring players with the scouts. If we get that match, then obviously that's a really good sign. And 9 times out of 10, there is a match. If a player's high-scoring data, he's likely to be high-scoring with the scouts. Sometimes, the reverse will happen. Scouts will really like a player, and then he won't score with the data. Now, where I feel comfortable in that regard is I know that it's not physically impossible for myself or my scouts to watch all the minutes that a player plays. And that's just a fact. It can't be debated. If a player plays 5,000 minutes, we physically can't spend 5,000 minutes watching that player. So I think we've moved a position within the club where there's not a dichotomy between the data analysis and the recruitment. We're trying to amalgamate it into the same sort of endeavour. And concomitantly, you've got people working on the data and people working on the scouting, but it's to the same end. And I think within the club, that's where we want things to keep developing. We want to make our scouting analysis aligned with the data analysis and vice versa.
Adrien, coming to you, you talked previously about data tuning. Is that part of your process that you're really building at Lille? Is that something that you believe is going to be really drive you forward and build that proprietary model?
I'll answer right away. Just carry on to what Brendan was saying, is that given the situation on the market, if you want the competitive edge, sometimes you have to take a risk. For instance, for those who follow us who are experts in terms of football data, when in AS Monaco, I recruited both Aurélien Chouameni and Youssouf Fofana. Data-wise, and if we had a head of data other than myself, it would have been a clear no. The key in this case is to know perfectly where you're going. And again, in the core proprietary model that we have is a methodology in terms of evaluating positional competences and taking the player not as a final product, but knowing for this or that positional competence, how can we develop it? So I don't recommend it to do it very often. And actually, we didn't do it in the Lille recruitment since I arrived. We always were aligned between, I would say, the data part and the recruitment part. But sometimes it has to happen, but you need to be backed up with a philosophy of developing the player. Then in Lille at the moment, we don't have yet proprietary model. We use StatsBomb data. For economic reasons, post-COVID crisis, we build free partnerships with tracking data companies to use their data. I think what is unique at the moment in Lille is our individual development methodology, our game model, of course, and then we create unique and tailor-made data related to these processes. And overall, I think that what is sometimes slowing up things in football clubs is never the data. I mean, the models, should they be proprietary or not, are far ahead of our processes. And in football clubs, really need to speed up our processes and to make sure that it embraces everyone in the club to use the data that we have available and the models, proprietary or not, that we have available.
And are there any blind spots currently that you and how do you fill those blind spots with other tools?
There are many blind spots. My personal philosophy when it comes to data is that data well used is data that asks a question, then another question. I never take the data as an answer, just as an additional question to study on the context. As you may know, we're not in the best season we ever had compared to the title of champion last year in Lille. So, for instance, there are plenty of questions in terms of the impact, trying to isolate. Sometimes we like to isolate in the collective sport a bit the individual impact or this of that player. These are questions we're trying to look at in terms of data, which we didn't find a satisfying answer yet. So, for instance, when our coach wants to try to have with a data view which players impact more offensively, defensively, we try different models. We also use the models that we have from StatsBomb, but we tried from the tracking data to build other models, but we didn't come to something very satisfying yet. Other teams and other people have, like Javier Fernandez, of course. So, for instance, this for us at the moment is a blind spot because we're not able to meet the manager's request on this.
Brendan, you previously talked about how many hours of video footage that you're watching. Are there any other areas that you feel that blind spots that you currently have with the data, but also tools and methods you're using to rectify those?
Yeah, sure. I think, as I said before, I think the two main elements of our job in recruitment is basically to obviously analyse the player tactically and things like that and technically. But one of the most important things that we do is making sure that we sign the right characters and the right people. And I think, it's the same in different sectors, human resources, etc. Data is being used to filter job applications, for example. I think that's something that's well known now. And if you speak to people within human resources, it's the same as within football. Sometimes people feel that the right characters aren't spotted. And I think we need to be emotive to a point in our job. We can't be too emotional because obviously that would create a blind spot within scouting. But away from the actual data and the scouting, we need to get to know the players that we want to sign and make sure that we've got the right characters. We've got a dressing room at the moment. I think at the last count, we've got 15 different nationalities. And the cohesion's been incredible this year. We've got two players within the team at the moment, Mikael Dessler, who I mentioned earlier, and Ado Anaiwo, who came to the club from Japan. Both of those players were halfway through a domestic season when they came here and signed at the start of this season. So when we signed those players, we knew we were signing hard workers, players that were ready to leave, in Ado's case, leave an entire continent to come here and take up a challenge. And it was a challenge, and it still is, because we've not won the league yet, and hopefully we'll do it on Saturday. But, it was a challenge. There was pressure on the players at this club. We told them that. We said, if you come here, you're going to have the weight of expectation. You're at potentially the biggest club in League 2. Is that something that phases you? And we had to have open and honest conversations with each player that we signed. We brought in 7 for all those players. What we did was sort of a documentary research, I would call it. I don't know if that's the right phrase in English, but in French we called it recherche documentaire. So we looked into the background of players. We watched interviews with them. We listened to podcasts. We read up and Google translated often any kind of newspaper article talking about a player and his background. And that's obviously something that you can't spot on the data. And that's an intrinsic part of how we do things here at Toulouse. It's not a coincidence that we've got such a good dressing room. We've got the right characters. We've got people that are here to be, cultural architects to develop the culture that we want. We've got people that are simulators, but we don't have anybody that's a disruptor, which is really good. And also, we've got 2 people that work at this club that do outstanding work. The team manager and the player liaison officer, who are available 24/7 to respond to any question or any needs of any of the playing staff and the coaching staff. So, I mean, people like that, you can't put a price on how much they contribute to the overall cohesion. And that's where the human touch in football is at its most important.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing. So I guess moving on to our final topic, which is really around the future of performance data and analytics. So starting with Adrien, it'd be great to hear from you around where you think the next few years will go. What tools are you interested most in using and hoping that will be developed in the next few years?
Sorry, Neil, I just lost you.
That's all right. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got the question. So just cut after. So on the individual development part, I think related to the drills we do, we're very much looking into what is done. And for instance, in NBA and everything that is creating data from the training facilities. It is something feasible. Also, some football clubs like Ajax already do it. Collecting more data on our players during the collective and individual drills. Should it be on our strikers to analyze better the finishing, to analyze better the body orientation? Same for the goalkeepers, same for other specific drills. So I very much follow all the data studies on body orientation, on automatizing the analysis of body orientation, because I believe analyzing the body orientation or the other topic, analyzing the scanning of the players and putting numbers into the quality of the scanning, taking the information of the players is essential, because at the end of the day, for instance, in our methodology, where the goal is to make instinctive some reactions on the pitch, the first key is to take the information. So if we can analyze both for individual development and even for scouting the way a player takes the information, of course you can train it, but if some players have this skill, it's a very important skill to build up on. And on the scouting part, more specifically, I would see the evolution first in terms of coverage of competitions, more data coverage of some continents that we evoked previously. And also, I also note the tendency to cover more and more under 17, under 19 competitions, because all the clubs are looking for cheap players. And now you have to go younger and younger to get them.
Brendan, similar question for you. How does the future of performance analytics impact really recruitment?
The first thing I'd say is that I couldn't agree more with Adrien, in the sense what I want to see more of is more coverage of leagues that we've mentioned already. That's a blind spot, a clear examples. We won't sign players at Toulouse unless we have data analysis, unless, there's the odd exception here or there. But by and large, as a general rule, we won't look at a player unless we can really analyse what they've done in the past. And that can be frustrating. So, hopefully we can get more analysis and more coverage. The coverage we have already is, thanks to the work that Zalis do, is incredible, but we need, I think going forward, we need and we want more coverage in different countries. From a recruitment point of view, obviously it's difficult to assess the feasibility of this, but I think maybe in the future, if there was a way that you could have projected data scores of a player's potential in the future, that could be really, really interesting. I mean, I'm not, a data scientist. I don't know how feasible that could be. But at the moment, obviously, when we look at the data of a player, it's based on what the player has done until now. It would be great if we could potentially fast forward 5 years to see where is this player predicted to be in 5 years' time. But obviously, the flip side of that is clubs like us, for example, we look at the data of our own players all the time. So you're going to add a few zeros to the end of the transfer fee if you think the player is going to have a proven by the data, increased score in that amount of time. So it could make things more complex from a buying point of view, and could actually strengthen the position of selling clubs.
Brilliant. And interesting, a question actually we've got in from Vasily around analysis of coaches and even referees, understanding behaviors and tendencies. So I want to start with Adrien there. What do you think about the analysis of coaches, and is that something you are currently doing, or are something that you're looking to do in the future?
It would be very interesting. Some consulting companies, not to name them, are doing it. So I've seen different methodologies evaluating the offensive or defensive contribution of coaches, evaluating the style, of course, the points per game, etc., etc. So obviously there are models on the market, but it's not something we do in Lille at the minute. It is, I think, very interesting to do, because not to mention the impact coaches have on then the way you develop the players and, of course, your results. So if you use data for your players, it's in direct line. It's very interesting to use data for your coach recruitment.
Brilliant. And another question from the audience, one from Larice, which is taking us away actually from the performance side, but using some of the data analytics techniques for other sectors of the club, for example, fan engagement and other areas. Is that something, Adrien, that you've looked at in the past or are going to look at?
In my area, I'm very specific to the sporting side, but I can talk for the previous clubs I've been in AS Monaco, the data department covers both now business topics and sporting topics. I think it's the case in Paris Saint-Germain too. So I think big clubs, well structured, tend to do both. In Lille, it's not the case at the minute.
And Brendan, is this similar for Toulouse? Are you very much focused on the performance side, or does the data team cover the full sectors of the club?
I've seen Larice's question there, and just to assuage any concerns you might have, Larice, about our capacity to fill the stadium. We sold out the stadium this year against Paris FC. We sold out the stadium against Niort. And hopefully on Saturday, we're going to do it again against Nîmes. I'm hearing that the ticket sales have been very good so far. So I think, listen, I think maybe the problems that Toulouse had traditionally in terms of attracting people to the games was based on two factors. First of all, the club was drastically underperforming. When you've got a good team on the pitch that's playing a nice style of play and is winning matches, you're going to attract people anyway. And secondly, I think there was an identity crisis. And I think people didn't feel connected to the club. They felt maybe a bit distanced from the ownership. I'm not saying that's through the fault of the previous ownership, but there was a perception that there wasn't a connection. I think it's not really data-led to my knowledge, but the fan engagement is a crucial part of what we're trying to do here at the club. It's not about finances. It's not about helping balance the books. It's about the competitive edge it gives you when you've got 30,000 Toulousains in the stadium backing the team. Toulouse is a city that is dynamic. It's a forward-thinking city. It's a city that is home to probably what people would describe as, or they have to me, the Real Madrid of rugby, Stade Toulousain. So we've had in the past perhaps difficulty to attract people to the football, but when you're winning matches, people come, and people here are proud of their city, and they're proud of the region, which is Occitanie as well, and they will come and back the team when we're doing well. I think one thing that the club's done, which has been really important, has been improving the relationship with the other clubs and different sports within the city. I think that taps into sort of what we do with the data, in the sense that data came from, first of all, started out in different sports, and you've got to be open-minded. So it's maybe not necessarily related to data, but I think the collaboration that we're having with different clubs in the city is something that's helping take the club to the next level. And I think now, before, people used to think that, people supported the rugby team and then they supported the football team. Now it's not. People support Toulouse and all the different sports, and that's the important thing.
Thank you. The final question for me really is around advice for current or future individuals in similar roles. So, Adrien, starting with you, what advice do you have for those who are aspiring to be data analysis for players and for coaches?
I think the key, and Brendan mentioned it, is not your data skills, because many are going to have them. It's this capacity you'll have to translate the data into football and vice versa. And the key advice I generally give when I'm asked to is to spend at least twice as much time on your processes than on studying even more deeply data. Because, again, there's very much pretty available data to make a difference in games, in individual development, in recruitment. But often, already with what we have today, we don't use 100% because we don't have within the clubs the processes to maximize it. So this would be my main advice.
Thank you. And Brendan, any advice for aspiring recruitment managers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is, often people contact me and ask if, we're looking for scouts or whatever. The first thing I would say is that volunteer and work for free. I think that is going to do you no harm. It's going to get you admiration from people that work in football. Every day when I come to work, I'm very grateful for the fact that I'm paid to do what I do. But there was a stage where I was doing it for free. And, that is, I think that's the best place to start. In terms of scouts that want to go to the next level, people who are already in sport and football, and want to move on to the next stage, I would say the future is going to be, in my opinion, based around this sort of breaking down that dichotomy, like I said, between data and scouting. Don't see data as a threat. I think people did see it as a threat before, and because of that, clubs didn't advance. The most important thing within a football club is to have happy fans and success on the pitch. And anything that you can do to achieve that, you should embrace. You shouldn't think about your own position and defending traditional scouting at the expense of not helping the club get to the next level. So I think be open to data, find the space that is needed for the human touch and the human eye, and make the most of that, and embrace what data can give you. Because at least what data does is it almost acts as an insurance policy to back up what you're saying and the decisions that you make. So all I can say is be open. Don't be scared of data. Sit down with data analysts. They're nice people. they don't want to get rid of scouts forever. That's not where we're at. And 9 times out of 10, people that work in data are very grateful for the input that comes from people like myself that live and breathe and go out to matches and work on the same goal as them, which is helping the club get to the next level.
Brilliant. Well, that's all we've got time for today. But thank you very much for both our panelists, for Adrien and for Brendan. It's been a really interesting discussion today. We've covered a variety of topics, and hopefully you'll be able to join us on future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you,
Thank
Brendan.
you very much.
Yes, really, really very interesting information from you all. I would like to thank you very much for your insights and the time you have dedicated to us. Don't see data as a threat, as Brendan said, and highlight I would like to highlight the human side of your job, because I'm sure it's a team effort to make everybody understand the value of data, from the president to the fans, to the last player of the team. So thank you for everything. On behalf of Johan Cruyff Institute and Portas Consulting, I also want to thank everyone for attending the session. And as I mentioned before, you will soon receive a link to the webinar recording, so you can watch the session again if you like. And we invite you to stay connected. We will be back next month with another topic we hope will also be of your interest. Keep an eye to our social media channels where you will find all the information. Thank you again. See you soon. And I wish you the best luck for the rest of the season.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.